The Galactic Survival Championship was, according to its pretentious marketing materials, the ultimate test of biological superiority. 12 species from across the galaxy would be dropped onto a primitive world with absolutely no technology, forced to survive using only their natural abilities. The winner would claim the coveted title of most evolutionarily superior species, plus a really gaudy trophy that nobody actually wanted but everyone pretended to care about. The arena planet looked like Earth's discount cousin. Same basic biosphere, same physics, same general vibe of a place that probably had decent Wi-Fi once upon a time but definitely didn't anymore. The production crew had spent months ensuring every piece of advanced technology was banned, confiscated, or destroyed. Even dental fillings were grounds for disqualification. Standing at the drop zone, the alien contestants sized each other up with the kind of barely concealed smugness usually reserved for wine tastings and academic conferences. Vextar the crystalline hummed with electromagnetic superiority, their faceted body catching sunlight like a disco ball designed by someone who took geology way too seriously. They'd evolved on a world where photosynthesis was the height of sophistication, and they weren't shy about mentioning it. Glorbina the aquatic bobbed in her temporary water tank, gills fluttering with barely contained excitement. Her species had conquered the crushing depths of their homeworld's oceans, which apparently made them natural survivors. She kept making comments about how easy this would be once she found a decent water source, preferably one with the right salinity levels and maybe some kelp for ambience. Zephron the energy being flickered between dimensions, their consciousness held together by what they claimed was pure evolutionary willpower. They existed as living energy, feeding off electromagnetic fields and cosmic radiation. On their homeworld they were basically gods. Here, without their technological amplifiers, they were starting to look suspiciously like a very confused lightning bolt. The other 9 contestants represented the usual collection of galactic stereotypes: bug people who insisted their hive mind was an advantage, plant people who claimed they could live off sunlight alone, rock people who figured they'd just wait everyone else out, and several variations on the theme of "we're apex predators from a death world, fear us." Then there was Marcus Henderson. Mac arrived 20 minutes late, finishing what appeared to be a gas station burrito and looking around the landing zone like he'd just stepped off a city bus rather than an intergalactic transport. He was aggressively average in every way that mattered to galactic standards: bipedal, carbon-based, no obvious special abilities, and wearing clothes that suggested he'd gotten dressed in the dark using someone else's laundry. The judges, a collection of pompous academics from the Galactic Scientific Council, looked at their notes with barely concealed disappointment. Humans weren't supposed to be interesting. They were the galactic equivalent of background noise, a species that had barely figured out faster than light travel and still used primitive chemical rockets for local transportation. But regulations were regulations, and someone had filed the paperwork correctly, so here Mac was, crumpling up his burrito wrapper and asking if anyone had seen a trash can around here. The horn sounded and chaos erupted in the most orderly way possible. Vextar immediately began searching for the perfect photosynthesis spot, muttering about optimal light wavelengths and complaining that the local star's spectrum was all wrong. They'd apparently evolved under a Class K star and found this G-type sun far too energetic. Within an hour they were huddled under a tree, claiming they needed to find shade to avoid overloading their crystalline matrix. The irony of a photosynthetic being hiding from sunlight was lost on exactly no one. Glorbina had bigger problems. Her species could survive out of water for maybe 6 hours before their gills started getting cranky. She'd confidently assumed the arena would be loaded with pristine water sources, but the nearest lake was a 2-hour hike through rough terrain. She began a slow, determined crawl toward what she hoped was water, leaving a trail of increasingly panicked slime behind her. The energy being situation was deteriorating rapidly. Zephron had discovered that without their homeworld's unique electromagnetic field or their species' technological amplifiers, they couldn't manipulate matter effectively. They were essentially a very expensive flashlight that occasionally achieved consciousness. Every few minutes they'd flicker dramatically and announce they were adapting to the local energy matrix. which was apparently energy being speak for slowly having an existential crisis. The bug people tried to establish a hive mind but kept arguing about who was in charge. The plant people discovered that standing still and hoping for the best wasn't actually a survival strategy when you had to compete for resources. The rock people had the right idea about waiting everyone out, but they'd forgotten that rocks don't generally need to eat, and they definitely did. Meanwhile, Mac had wandered over to a promising-looking pile of dry wood and started building what was clearly going to be a fire. Now, fire-making was technically allowed under the rules, but most species had evolved past needing it. When you can photosynthesize, manipulate energy, or survive on mineral absorption, who needs combustion? The judges watched with mild curiosity as Mac arranged kindling in a neat little nest, selected 2 appropriate sticks, and began the slow process of friction fire starting. Primitive sniffed one of the judges, a pompous academic whose species had transcended physical form sometime around their Bronze Age. 20 minutes later, Mac had a crackling fire going and was roasting what appeared to be fish he'd somehow caught with his bare hands while everyone else was still figuring out basic shelter. Vextar, still hiding under their tree, called out desperately, "Human, your combustion device is producing excess carbon dioxide. It's disrupting my photosynthetic process." Mac looked up from his fish, which was starting to smell really good. "Yeah, that's how fire works. Maybe try photosynthesizing somewhere else. There is no optimal light source in this environment. Have you tried, I don't know, adapting?" The first elimination occurred at sunset when Zephron finally flickered out entirely, their consciousness unable to maintain coherence without technological support. The energy being's last words were a philosophical treatise on the nature of existence that nobody really understood, but everyone pretended was profound. By nightfall, 3 more contestants had been eliminated. The bug people had dissolved into civil war, the aquatic delegation had dried up in transit to the lake, and one of the plant people had apparently been eaten by something that the judges diplomatically described as local wildlife. Mac offered to share his fire with the remaining contestants. "Plenty of warmth to go around," he said, gesturing to the neat little ring of stones he'd built around his campfire. The aliens looked at each other with the kind of embarrassed pride that usually preceded very bad decisions. "We do not require your primitive assistance," declared Vextar, shivering slightly in the growing darkness. "Your loss," Mac said, settling in for a comfortable night next to his fire, belly full of fish, while the surviving aliens huddled together in the cold and tried to pretend they weren't already regretting their life choices. Day 2 dawned on a very different landscape. Mac had apparently spent the pre-dawn hours being productive in ways that made the overnight judges nervous. Where yesterday there had been a simple campfire, there was now what could generously be called a fire station. Multiple burning logs arranged in an efficient configuration, with carefully banked coals that could be revived instantly, and a neat stack of prepared kindling that suggested someone had been thinking ahead. "He's upgraded to bow drill methodology," reported Judge Krixtal, consulting their monitoring equipment with growing concern. "The human has achieved reliable fire-on-demand capability." While the judges worried, Mac explored his surroundings with the kind of methodical efficiency that suggested he'd done this before. He found a clay deposit near the stream and spent an hour experimenting with different mixtures until he had something that would hold its shape when heated. By midday, he had primitive pottery drying in the sun and was explaining to no one in particular that you really couldn't have proper civilization without decent cookware. The remaining aliens were having mixed results with basic survival. Vextar had discovered that they could actually photosynthesize quite effectively if they stopped complaining about the light spectrum and just got on with it. But they were still having trouble with the concept of hunting or gathering. Their species had evolved past needing solid food, which was great for transcendence but terrible for a competition that required actual caloric intake. Glorbina had made it to the lake, but discovered that alien lake water apparently disagreed with her digestive system in spectacular ways. She spent most of the morning explaining to anyone who would listen that the mineral content was all wrong and the pH was completely unsuitable for her species. The plant people were slowly figuring out that they could supplement photosynthesis with actual nutrient absorption from the soil, but they were doing it in the most inefficient way possible, basically just sticking their feet in random dirt and hoping for the best. Mac, meanwhile, had moved on to what could only be described as industrial applications. He built fish traps. Not just one, but a whole system of them, strategically placed in the stream to maximize catch efficiency. He'd constructed a smoking rack for food preservation that would have made any wilderness survival instructor weep with pride. And he'd started what appeared to be organized agriculture, clearing small plots of land and transplanting promising-looking wild plants into neat rows. "Is that allowed?" asked Judge Vexnari, watching Mac carefully tend his improvised garden. "The rules state no technology," replied Judge Crixtal, reading from their official regulations. "Agriculture is technically biological manipulation of natural resources, but he's creating surplus food production. Still allowed under current regulations." By evening, Mac had enough food stockpiled to feed himself for a week, plus extras. He'd made cordage from plant fibers, constructed basic tools from stone and wood, and had started what appeared to be a primitive but effective water filtration system using sand, charcoal, and cloth. Vextar, who had spent the day slowly starving while insisting they didn't need solid food, finally cracked around sunset. "Human," they called out, their crystalline structure dimming noticeably. "Perhaps we could discuss a temporary alliance." Mac looked up from his evening meal, which appeared to be some kind of fish stew that smelled absolutely incredible. "What kind of alliance?" "You appear to have mastered food production. I have other skills that might prove useful." "Like what?" Vextar hesitated. I can provide light for nighttime activities." Mac considered this. "You know what, that's actually pretty useful. Tell you what, you help me expand the garden tomorrow, and I'll make sure you get fed." The crystalline being practically glowed with relief. "This is acceptable." From her position by the lake, Glorbina called out desperately, "What about me?" "Can you do anything useful?" Mac asked. "I am an excellent swimmer." "Great. Tomorrow you can help me improve the fish traps." And just like that, the competition had become something entirely different. Day 3 was when the judges started having serious conversations about rule interpretations. Mac's camp now looked less like a survival shelter and more like the foundation of a small town. He'd built multiple structures using a combination of wood, stone, and clay that suggested someone had been paying attention during human history classes. There was a dedicated cooking area, a workshop for tool making, organized storage for food and materials, and what appeared to be the beginnings of a primitive but effective sewage system. "He's made soap," reported Judge Crixtal in the tone usually reserved for reporting galactic emergencies. "Soap? Mop. Using ash lye and rendered animal fat. The human has achieved basic hygiene technology." Judge Vexnari consulted their rule book frantically. "Is soap allowed?" "Technically, it's just chemical processing of naturally occurring materials." "But the implications." Indeed, the implications were troubling. Mac had created a commodity that every other contestant desperately wanted. Personal cleanliness was apparently a universal desire, even among species that claimed they'd transcended physical concerns. His shelter had evolved beyond mere survival into something approaching comfort. He'd figured out ventilation, insulation, and even basic furniture. His bed was a carefully constructed platform with woven plant fiber mattresses that looked more comfortable than what most species had in their actual homes. There was a table, chairs, and organized storage that would have made any efficiency expert proud. But the real game changer was the economy. Mac had surplus, lots of it, more food than he could eat, more tools than he could use, and more soap than one person could reasonably need. And the other contestants were finally starting to understand that pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. Vextar had become Mac's first official employee, trading light production services for regular meals and access to the soap supply. Their crystalline structure had never looked better, and they'd started providing illumination for Mac's evening projects with genuine enthusiasm. Glorbina had proven surprisingly useful once she stopped complaining about water quality. She'd helped Mac improve his fish traps into something approaching industrial efficiency, and in exchange, she got filtered water that agreed with her system and enough fish to keep her properly fed. The remaining plant people had abandoned their random root-sticking strategy and signed on as Mac's agricultural consultants. Turns out they actually knew quite a lot about soil composition and plant growth when they weren't trying to photosynthesize their way through life. Mac's garden had expanded into what could generously be called a farm. Even the rock people had found their niche. They couldn't move fast, but they were excellent at construction work once they figured out that cooperation was more effective than just sitting around being rocky. Mac had them building stone foundations and walls that would probably outlast the competition by several centuries. "This is supposed to be individual survival," muttered Judge Crickstow, watching Mac coordinate his growing workforce with the kind of easy authority that suggested he'd done this sort of thing before. "The rules don't specifically forbid cooperation," pointed out Judge Vexnari. "But he's not just cooperating. He's governing." Mac had indeed established what could only be described as a primitive government. There were job assignments, resource distribution, conflict resolution procedures, and what appeared to be the beginning of a legal system. When two of the plant people got into an argument about gardening techniques, Mac mediated the dispute with the kind of patient efficiency that made everyone involved walk away satisfied. By the end of day 3, Mac's settlement had a population of 8, organized labor, surplus production, and basic civil services. The remaining contestants had gone from desperate individuals to productive citizens of what was rapidly becoming an actual civilization. "We need to do something about this," declared Judge Crickstow during the evening emergency meeting. "Like what?" "He's not breaking any rules. He's breaking the spirit of the competition. The spirit of the competition is survival. He's surviving spectacularly. He's thriving. There's a difference." But Mac wasn't done yet. The 4th-day emergency meeting of the Galactic Scientific Council was held in what could only be described as panic mode. "He's established waste management," reported Judge Crickstow, consulting a growing list of Mac's innovations with visible distress. "Proper sanitation, organized disposal, even composting for agricultural enhancement." "Composting is technically biological recycling," pointed out Judge Vexnari weakly. "He's created a functioning society." Mac's settlement now had streets. Actual streets with designated pathways, drainage systems, and what appeared to be the beginnings of urban planning. His population had grown to include every remaining contestant except for one holdout rock person who insisted they didn't need help but kept edging closer to the settlement whenever they thought no one was looking. The division of labor had evolved into something approaching specialization. Vextar had become the settlement's chief engineer, using their light-producing abilities to enable round-the-clock construction. Glorbina managed the fisheries and water systems. The plant people ran agriculture and food processing. The rock people handled construction and infrastructure. Mac himself had somehow become mayor, judge, economic planner, and general problem solver all rolled into one. "We need to introduce additional challenges," declared Judge Crickstow. "Something to disrupt this civilization he's building." "What kind of challenges?" "Natural disasters, predator attacks, resource scarcity." Judge Vexnari looked uncomfortable. "That seems like changing the rules mid-competition." "We're not changing the rules. We're introducing environmental variables." So they tried. First, they released a pack of local predators near the settlement. Mac's response was to organize hunting parties, establish a perimeter defense, and turn the whole thing into a community bonding exercise. By evening they had fresh meat, improved security, and what appeared to be the beginnings of a military organization. Then they caused a drought by temporarily blocking the stream. Mac's response was to dig wells, implement water conservation measures, and establish rationing protocols that somehow kept everyone happy while actually improving the settlement's long-term water security. The judges tried introducing a food shortage by removing some of the local plant species. Mac's agricultural team responded by developing crop rotation, companion planting, and what appeared to be selective breeding for improved yields. Every challenge we introduce, he turns into an opportunity for improvement, complained Judge Krixtal. Maybe that's the point, suggested Judge Vexnari quietly. What do you mean? Maybe humans are just really good at this. At what? At surviving. At adapting. At turning problems into solutions. The settlement now had a population of 11, including the holdout rock person who had finally given up and joined when Mac offered them a position as head of geological survey. They had established trade relationships with local wildlife, a functioning government, organized religion, mostly just group meditation sessions, but it seemed to work, and what appeared to be the beginning of an educational system. Mac was teaching the younger generation of plant people about advanced agriculture while learning about crystalline energy management from Vextar. The rock people were sharing geological expertise while picking up techniques for rapid construction. Glorbina had started a swimming school that was apparently quite popular. This is unprecedented, muttered Judge Krixtal, watching Mac mediate a dispute between the agricultural and construction departments over resource allocation. One individual has created a functioning multi-species society in less than a week. But maybe we should just see where this goes, suggested Judge Vexnari. Where it goes? It goes to the complete invalidation of our entire competition structure. But Mac wasn't finished yet. That evening, as the judges watched in mounting horror, he called what appeared to be a town hall meeting to discuss infrastructure improvements, resource management, and long-term settlement planning. The human had built a civilization, and worse, it was working. Judgment Day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance the Galactic Scientific Council could muster, which was considerable but felt somewhat inadequate given the circumstances. Mac's settlement now housed 12 individuals representing 6 different species, all of whom seemed genuinely happy to be there. The place looked like a cross between a medieval village and a modern eco-community, complete with sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, courtesy of Vextar's improved light production, efficient waste management, and what appeared to be the galaxy's first successful multi-species democracy. The judges stood before the assembled contestants with the kind of barely concealed frustration usually reserved for the academic conferences where someone had just disproven your life's work. The Galactic Survival Championship, began Judge Krixtal, consulting their notes with visible reluctance, was designed to determine the most evolutionarily superior species through individual survival capabilities. Right, said Mac, who was apparently the designated spokesperson for what everyone had started calling New Harmony. And we survived. All of us. That's not the point, snapped Judge Vexnari. This was supposed to be individual competition. The rules didn't say anything about not helping each other. The spirit of the competition. The spirit of the competition, interrupted Glorbina, speaking up from her position as the settlement's newly elected water commissioner, was survival. We all survived. Vextar, now calling themselves the Chief of Illumination Services, added their own commentary. The human demonstrated that survival is not merely individual persistence, but the ability to create sustainable systems that benefit all participants. He cheated, declared the rock person who had held out the longest, though they said it without much conviction. How? Asked Mac reasonably. By being good at staying alive? Judge Krixtal consulted their rulebook one more time. The competition was designed to test natural biological advantages, and what's more natural than cooperation? Mac gestured to the thriving settlement around them. Every successful species in galactic history got there through working together. Individual survival is just the first step. But you're human, protested Judge Vexnari. You don't have any special abilities. Mac laughed, the sound echoing off the well-constructed buildings of New Harmony. Special abilities? We're the species that figured out how to make fire, grow food, build shelter, create tools, establish governments, and work together to solve problems. We're not special because we can photosynthesize or manipulate energy or live forever. We're special because we can take any situation and figure out how to make it better. That's not a biological advantage, insisted Judge Krixtal. Isn't it? We evolved brains that can adapt to any environment, hands that can manipulate any material, and social structures that can incorporate any species. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the most efficient. We're the most stubborn. The other contestants nodded agreement. They'd all experienced Mac's particular brand of helpful stubbornness over the past week. The human demonstrated superior evolutionary adaptation, declared Vextar, not through individual excellence, but through the ability to improve collective outcomes. Judge Vexnari sighed. The rules clearly state that the winner must be the most evolutionarily superior species. Great, said Mac. So we won. You can't win a species-wide competition as an individual. Who said I was an individual? Mac gestured to the settlement again. We're all citizens of New Harmony now. Multi-species cooperative civilization. We all evolved together this week. The judges looked at each other with the kind of defeated expression usually reserved for bureaucrats who had just discovered that someone had read the fine print. This is highly irregular, muttered Judge Krixtal. But not against the rules, pointed out Glorbina helpfully. Not technically against the rules, agreed Judge Vexnari. There was a long pause while the judges conferred in the kind of whispered consultation that usually preceded very expensive legal settlements. By the authority vested in us by the Galactic Scientific Council, Judge Krixtal finally announced, we declare the human and associated cooperative civilization the winner of this year's Galactic Survival Championship. The celebration that followed was modest by galactic standards but enthusiastic by any measure. Mac accepted the trophy on behalf of New Harmony, made a brief speech about the importance of working together, and invited the judges to stay for dinner. They declined, but not before Judge Vexnari quietly asked Mac if humans were interested in consulting on other galactic challenges. Sure, Mac said, already thinking about improvements to the settlement's infrastructure. Just remember, we don't have any special abilities. We just figure out how to make things work. As the judges departed, Mac looked around at the thriving civilization he'd accidentally created in less than a week and shrugged. Not bad for a species that still uses chemical rockets. The galaxy would never be quite the same.